It was a stormy night. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, while rain pounded against the glass in a relentless rhythm. Emily, a young girl in her late teens, sat alone in her house. Her parents had gone out for the evening, leaving her by herself. She'd never minded being alone before, but tonight felt different. There was an eerie tension in the air. The house creaked and groaned as if it was alive, breathing with the storm. Emily was curled up on the couch, trying to focus on the movie playing on the TV, but she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled deep in her stomach. She glanced around the room, her eyes scanning the dimly lit corners, as though expecting to find something lurking there. Suddenly there was a loud crash from the kitchen. Emily jumped, her heart racing. She tried to tell herself it was just the wind. Maybe a window had blown open or something had fallen, but the crash was too loud, too deliberate. She hesitated for a moment before slowly rising from the couch. As she approached the kitchen, she could feel the air grow colder. Her footsteps were slow and cautious. The lights flickered for a moment, plunging the house into brief darkness before coming back on. When she stepped into the kitchen, nothing seemed out of place at first, until she noticed that one of the kitchen drawers had been pulled open and utensils were scattered across the floor. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't touched that drawer all evening. She bent down to pick up the fallen utensils, her hands shaking slightly. But just as she reached for them, she heard something. A faint whisper like a breath on the back of her neck. She froze. The hair on her arm stood on end. Slowly, she straightened up, eyes wide, trying to convince herself she had imagined it. But then she heard it again, this time clearer. A low, raspy voice right behind her ear whispered, "Emily?" She spun around, but no one was there. The kitchen was empty. The only sound was the rain outside, tapping against the windows. She backed away, her pulse quickening, her mind racing. She grabbed her phone from the counter and dialed her mum, but the call wouldn't connect. "No service," she whispered in disbelief. Suddenly, the lights flickered again, and then darkness, and then she saw it. In the reflection of the kitchen window just behind her stood a figure. It was tall, shadowy, and its eyes gleamed in the faint light. Emily gasped and spun around, shining her light directly at the spot, but there was nothing there. The room was empty. She was alone, or so it seemed. Her breath came in ragged gasps now, and she could hear her pulse thudding in her ears. Emily backed out of the kitchen, desperate to get to the front door, but as she crossed the hallway, she saw something in the corner of her eye. A shape, moving just beyond the threshold of the living room. She paused, barely breathing, staring into the darkness. The shape shifted slightly, as though watching her, waiting for her to make the next move. Then, slowly, it began to emerge from the shadows. A figure, pale and gaunt, with hollow eyes and a twisted grin etched onto its face. Emily screamed and bolted for the door, but it wouldn't budge. The handle rattled in her grip, but it was as if the door was locked from the outside. Her phone slipped from her hand in her panic, clattering to the floor as she yanked at the door with all her strength. Behind her, she could hear soft footsteps, growing closer. The air grew colder with each step. She could feel the presence looming behind her, that sickening grin burning into her back. With one final, desperate tug, the door flew open, and Emily stumbled out into the storm, falling onto the wet grass. She scrambled to her feet and ran as fast as she could, never daring to look back. The wind whipped her hair around her face, and the rain soaked through her clothes, but she didn't stop until she reached the street. Only then did she turn around to look at the house. It stood there, dark and silent, as if nothing had happened. But Emily knew better. Something was in there, something dark, something evil, and it had whispered her name.